So, Russell, I want to talk to you about your spirituality and your religion in a second. I think what's fascinating about sort of your personal story is, first of all, it's just the story of Ecclesiastes, essentially. I mean, you basically took the Solomonic journey through, what if I had 1,000 wives and 1,000 horses? And then it seems that you sort of came around to the view that there was a certain emptiness to that. But for somebody like me, so I grew up religious, right? I grew up from the time I was a young teen, like 11, 12, 13 years old, going to an Orthodox synagogue, very steeped in the sort of Judeo-Christian notions of personal virtue and controlling appetites and all that sort of stuff. There's always a draw in our culture toward, as you say, the fulfillment of those appetites. And as somebody who, I mean, you really went whole hog on a lot of this stuff, maybe you can talk about, when was it that you sort of started to feel like maybe this isn't the be all end all? Maybe there's something more than this.
Personally, for me, it took it required that the encounters be kind of lived through. I understood things theoretically and spiritually long before I was able to embody them and live by them. I reckon it's quite hard to monitor how you feel if you're being lauded and applauded, if you're successful financially and being celebrated. Sometimes you can lose touch with what's actually happening to you spiritually, or, if you're not a religious person, emotionally or psychically. But I suppose in retrospect, and I'm certainly aware, and at the time I had an inkling that I was feeling a little disconnected. And because I'm so privileged to have this background in addiction and more importantly in recovery, I began to recognize that any external stimulant that begins to govern my state, my perception, govern my moods, the way I identify with myself, could potentially be categorized as addiction. If my life becomes about how other people see me, about what's written about me, how financially successful I am, then I'm kind of living in an external object. And what I was started to awaken to was that I wasn't happy, that I wasn't fulfilled. And I love your classical reference there, Ben. It's difficult though, because things like the flesh is satisfying, drugs are fulfilling, flattery and praise are enticing and distracting, and it still takes discipline in me. Still now, when I look at the world of celebrity and what I might classify as the world of individualism, egocentrism, I still find it kind of, wow, appealing. And I'm a professional person. I have intention and ambition. I see the way that you run a media organization and I think, wow, this is really sort of successful, and I still am stimulated and attracted to versions of success. But the difference is now I understand wholeheartedly and I fully accept that there is nothing external that can ever make me feel resolved, fulfilled, or complete. That if I'm ever to feel connected, valued, and valuable, awake and aware, that I have to live a life of meaning and purpose. Now, you're speaking about your own background, that you had a set of traditional values that were accessible to you, and I'm sure I did in my own way. I'm from like a single parent family. Religion wasn't sort of at the forefront of our sort of cultural life. I'm like Church of England. That just means that's the thing you get given. You're just issued that on entry, on arrival. There's no like study exams or outfits required, Spirituality wasn't like something that I was particularly thinking about. This is, in a way, mate, this dovetails with a kind of ideological tool that's used often in recovery from addiction. The belief that most people are craving spiritual fulfillment in some way, purpose, meaning, a sense of community, togetherness, fairness, justice, that perhaps these values are not entirely cultural, but somehow inherent. And those of us that grow up without them might try to synthesize those values by becoming successful, or by becoming a heroin addict, by becoming a devoted athlete, or by hanging around strip clubs. We're all looking for meaning, purpose. Now, and for me, pleasure is a kind of a palliative, and what I really need is purpose. But the culture does not promote these kind of messages. The culture, in my opinion, promotes individualism, materialism, rationalism, scientism. If it can't be measured, then it isn't there. And for me, I was a devotee of a particular culture, a culture that tells you become successful. All the while, I had these kind of spiritual inclinations and yearnings, but I didn't know how to process them. I wasn't really mentored until I got clean from drugs and alcohol. And because those things are so appealing and attractive, carnality, celebrity, it took a while. It took being in it. I'm very fortunate. I feel privileged to have had the experience of the red carpets and the flash bulbs and the adulation, because now I recognize, oh yeah, I've been there. Still now though, Ben, I can see a picture of myself in a situation of celebrity from 10 years ago or whatever and think, oh my God, that looks so appealing and cool. Must have meant something, but I remember that it is empty. And for people, like most people, like, when you hear those famous surveys that are bandied about, young people who want to be celebrities, they want to be famous, they don't even care what they're famous for, they just want to be famous. I wonder how my life might have been different if I'd have understood that purpose and meaning can be connected with internally and all that you acquire externally. Whilst it might provide gratification, pleasure, and it is not good fun being poor, I can personally vouch for that. These things are not the solution to spiritual problems.
So I totally agree with you. I think that when it comes to what the media have pushed upon us and what modern society pushes so much, it's this idea that there are all of these sort of ersatz solutions for the hole in your heart that is left when there is the natural inclination for spirituality and for spiritual connection. And what I've said is that the lack of God has left a hole in our hearts, and we're trying to fill that with a wide variety of things. And for a lot of people, that is stimulants. For a lot of people, that is sex. For a lot of people, that is politics. And the substitution of sort of political polarization or tribal identification for any sort of spiritual connection, mission, purpose. It's really easy to make that mistake, especially in a society that, as you say, tends to measure things on a very data-driven level, that happiness equals this number of dollars, plus this number of lovers, plus this amount of, this number of houses, plus this many Twitter followers. And the reality is that none of that is a substitute for the sort of meaning and purpose that, pretty much every philosopher since the dawn of time has been searching for.
Yes, and while we're in some ways only qualified to speak about it empirically from an individual perspective, it's clear that many of these values are culturally endorsed to and almost entirely to the point of saturation. I feel like, I don't get on TikTok too regular, as a user, but I've looked at it and I felt like, my God, the velocity, the potency now of that message, the power of it. I found it difficult enough not to look at pornography when I was an adolescent, when it was analog rags found in hedges and bushes. Now your pocket is a portal to limitless pixelated digital sex ghosts available at a moment's notice. How are you gonna evolve a sophisticated and loving and empathetic sexuality when bombarded with that amount of stimulation? It's sort of I suppose you could, from a dietary perspective, from a technological and pornographic perspective, chart these markers, but I wonder where they are more insidiously present in culture around ideas such as economics. I wonder where else we're being hypnotized, seduced, and guided by cultural messaging that is not beneficial to individuals and is not in tune with, even if you don't believe in creation or divinity, how we are evolved to live.
So let's talk for a second about your sort of view of spirituality. So there are a lot of folks out there who consider themselves sort of spiritual, but not religious, connected to something deeper, but not sure exactly what, or not really even directed toward exactly what. So how does your spirituality define yourself? You've talked about meaning and purpose. What would you say your sort of meaning is? Where do you find meaning?
Well, I find the rubric through which my spirituality is lived and understood is fortunately quite practical, in that I'm in recovery from addiction. And what that gives you is a set of principles and an ongoing sort of almost cyclical system that you can live within. The first step in these 12-step systems, Ben, is surrender. I don't know what to do anymore. My life has got problems in it and I don't know how to control it. The second step is about having hope that change is possible for you as an individual. A lot of people fall down there, whether it's in terms of chemical dependency or changing behavior, or more broadly, because I can test these messages are somewhat perennial and could be applied anywhere in life. A lot of people think the world cannot change. Human beings are essentially, defined by sort of cruelty, coldness, selfishness, or whatever. So, these things are designed for the individual, but I think are socially applicable. So the second step, having admitted there's a problem, the second step is believing change is possible. The third step is coming to believe that a power greater than yourself can restore. The third step, is made a decision to turn our will and our life over to the care of God as we understood God. Now that's sort of completely open to interpretation. There are people in 12-step groups from a variety of religious backgrounds and no religious background at all. For me, what it means is the set of values and systems that I come up with in my head are, if not arbitrary, somewhat as a result of my conditioning and my impulses and instincts, which I do with some guidance on. I've already admitted there's a problem. I believe it's possible to change. Now I get ready to accept help. Each one of these steps can be really unpacked quite deeply and applied, I think, almost universally to matters of discontent, loss, loneliness, excessive attachment, unwillingness to accept that we live a finite life. I think they're really, really powerful tools. And what it did for me, I always had a sense of, look, I always embraced mystery. Drug addicts usually do. If you've taken psychedelic drugs and had the kind of experiences that they induce, if you feel the kind of despair and loss and loneliness that a lot of addicts feel, and the kind of conditions that becoming a drug addict introduce you to, criminality and the kind of, sort of cliched desperation that one might encounter, in a sense, it opens you up to the possibility of God, because nothing for me, and I know you're I know you're a religious man, and also know that you know theology and that you know scripture, but suffering, and I'm not making claims to Job levels of suffering, but to be introduced to God on that level of knowing I am weak. On my own, I am weak. I need something powerful in my life. Me, fueled just by my ego and my petty, trivial desires, I will live a petty, trivial life. I need something powerful. And now, I don't know if that's applicable to anybody. I'm sure many of your viewers are religious. I'm sure many of them are atheistic. I'm sure many of them are individualistic. It's pointless even really to speculate. But for me personally, I need to feel that there is beauty, that there is love, that there is a kind of glory. And I think whether we're talking about sort of the success of Marvel movies and the way they introduce archetypes and grand themes, or the kind of tensions that we feel politically sometimes, or the epidemic of mental health problems and opioid addiction in your country currently, this for me is demonstration of the yearning, the need for real change. And in my humble opinion, and God knows I know your opinion differs, for me, these problems cannot be resolved within the limited framework of current political discourse. We need to invite meaning and purpose, and if not more directly, God, back into the conversation of how we construct society and how we organize systems of governance and even exchange.
I hope you enjoyed that clip from the Ben Shapiro Show Sunday Special. If you did, go ahead and hit the subscribe button so you stay up to date on all of our future content.